The first thing my son heard that evening wasn't my voice. It was the news anchor saying my name. Authorities say retired Seattle engineer Richard Bennett saved at least 6 people after rushing into a chain reaction crash outside SeaTac Airport. Witnesses say he ignored repeated warnings and climbed into burning vehicles while waiting for firefighters to arrive. My son dropped his phone. My daughter stopped chewing halfway through dinner. And just 2 hours earlier, they had both told me to take an Uber. My name is Richard Bennett. I'm 68 years old, a retired civil engineer from Seattle, Washington. I've never liked being the center of attention. For 42 years, my wife Linda handled birthdays, holidays, neighborhood gatherings, and family dinners. I was happiest fixing a leaky faucet, building a bookshelf for the grandkids, or grilling burgers on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Linda always said I was the kind of man people depended on because I never complained. Maybe that was true. Or maybe I simply never wanted the people I loved to carry my burdens. That habit would eventually become my greatest mistake. 3 days before everything changed, I stood beside my wife's casket in Vancouver. Linda had spent the last several months there with her younger sister after her cancer became more aggressive. The treatments available in Canada offered one last possibility, and her sister insisted on helping care for her around the clock. I traveled back and forth as often as I could. Every trip became harder. Every goodbye lasted longer. Then one rainy Tuesday morning, there were no more goodbyes. Just silence. The funeral was small, exactly how Linda wanted it. No expensive flowers, no dramatic speeches, just family, a few lifelong friends, and soft music she loved. After everyone left, I remained standing beside her grave until the cemetery groundskeeper politely reminded me they were closing. "You can come back tomorrow," he said gently. I smiled. I know. But tomorrow already felt like another lifetime. The next morning, I boarded a short flight back to Seattle. I carried one small suitcase. My wedding ring still rested on my finger. I couldn't imagine taking it off. During the flight, I stared out the window almost the entire time. Clouds drifted beneath us like fresh snow. Linda used to reach across the armrest whenever we flew. She always hated turbulence. She'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "If we survive this flight, you're buying me clam chowder." I always laughed. Now the empty seat beside me hurt more than words could describe. The plane landed at SeaTac a few minutes before 5. As passengers stood to retrieve their bags, I stayed seated. There was no reason to hurry. Nobody was waiting for me. Still, I opened the family group chat. It included me, my son Brian, my daughter Melissa, Brian's wife Karen Melissa, and a few family members who mostly shared birthday pictures and holiday plans. I typed, "My flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" I looked at the screen for nearly a minute before pressing send. Part of me almost deleted it. I've never liked asking anyone for favors, especially my own children. The message showed as delivered. A minute later, Brian replied, "We're busy. Take an Uber." No hello. No, how was the funeral? No, are you okay? Just 6 words. Before I had time to think about them, another notification appeared. Melissa. "Dad, you should have planned better." I stared at those words much longer than I should have. Planned better. As though grief could be scheduled between soccer practice and business meetings. As though losing the woman I'd loved since I was 24 should have fit neatly into everyone else's calendar. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I could have reminded them where I'd been. I could have told them their mother had been buried less than 24 hours earlier. I could have said how badly I wanted to see familiar faces instead of climbing into another stranger's car. Instead, I wrote only 2 words. No worries. I pressed send. Then I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket, not because everything was fine, but because I suddenly understood something. You can't make people care. Outside the terminal, Seattle greeted me with gray skies and cool air. A light drizzle coated the sidewalks. Travelers hurried toward waiting cars. Families hugged. Children laughed. Drivers leaned on their horns. Life continued exactly as it always had. Only mine had changed forever. I wheeled my suitcase toward the rideshare pickup area. My knees ached. Not from age, from exhaustion. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in weeks. As I waited, I noticed an elderly woman struggling to lift her suitcase off the curb. Without thinking, I walked over. "Need a hand?" She smiled with relief. "Would you?" I lifted it into the trunk of her son's SUV. "Thank you," she said. I hope someone does the same for you someday. I smiled politely. I hope so too. A loud explosion interrupted everything. Metal slammed against metal. Glass shattered. People screamed. Every head turned toward the airport exit road. A fuel delivery truck had jackknifed after being struck by a speeding SUV. Several vehicles piled into one another. Smoke billowed into the evening sky. One sedan spun sideways before crashing into the concrete barrier. Another vehicle burst into flames. People froze. Some pulled out phones. Others backed away. Years ago, before retirement, I'd volunteered with emergency preparedness programs during earthquake drills and industrial accident training. Instinct took over before fear had a chance. I dropped my suitcase. Someone grabbed my arm. "Sir, don't go over there." I pulled free. "Call 911. They already did. Good. Then I ran. The driver's side of the burning sedan wouldn't open. A young mother inside was pounding desperately against the window. A little girl cried in the back seat. The smell of gasoline filled the air. Someone shouted, "It's going to explode." Maybe, maybe not. Either way, those people couldn't wait. I grabbed a chunk of broken concrete from the roadside. With every ounce of strength I had left, I swung it against the side window. Once, twice, 3 times. The glass finally shattered. "Cover your face," I yelled. The mother shielded the little girl as I cleared away the remaining shards. Behind me, sirens echoed in the distance. But they still sounded far away. Far too far. And all I could think was one simple thing. Linda would never forgive me if I stood there and watched someone else lose the person they loved. The first police officer who reached me grabbed my shoulder and shouted over the noise, "Sir, step back. We need you behind the barricade." "I can't," I answered, pointing toward an overturned SUV. "There's still someone inside." The officer looked where I was pointing. A hand was pressed against the cracked windshield. He didn't waste another second. "You!" he yelled to 2 firefighters running toward us. "Help him!" Until that moment, I hadn't realized how badly my hands were shaking. Adrenaline had drowned out everything else. Now I could feel cuts across both palms from the shattered glass. My right sleeve had been scorched where flames had licked across the doorframe. My knees ached from kneeling on broken asphalt. But none of that mattered. The firefighters pried open the SUV while paramedics rushed toward the sedan I'd helped open. Someone behind me shouted, "The little girl is breathing." I closed my eyes for one brief second. "Thank you, Linda." Nearly 45 minutes later, the scene was finally under control. Emergency vehicles surrounded the entire airport entrance. Traffic stretched for miles. A police officer approached carrying a clipboard. "Sir, what's your name?" "Richard Bennett." "Age?" 68. He looked at me for a long moment. "You should probably be in one of those ambulances." "I've had worse." He smiled despite himself. "My wife says every man over 60 says exactly that." The word wife hit me like another collision. I nodded quietly. "I just buried mine yesterday." His smile disappeared. I'm sorry." "So am I." He lowered the clipboard. "I'll keep this brief." Over the next 20 minutes, I answered questions. Which vehicle had I reached first? How many passengers had I pulled out? Had I seen what caused the crash? Several witnesses interrupted repeatedly. "No, officer," one woman insisted. "He's leaving things out." "What do you mean?" "He went back." Another man stepped forward. 3 different times. A young college student added, "Everybody else was standing there filming. He kept running back." I shook my head. There were firefighters there. "Not at first," the student replied. "They got there because you bought everyone time." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't been keeping count. I'd simply seen people who needed help. A paramedic finally convinced me to sit on the back step of an ambulance while she cleaned the cuts on my hands. She looked to be about my granddaughter's age. "Does someone need to come pick you up?" I almost laughed. "No, you sure and I'm sure." She wrapped fresh bandages around both palms. "You've got family nearby." "I do." "Have they been notified?" "They're busy." She studied my face for a second. She was too professional to ask another question. Instead, she simply handed me a bottle of water. "I hope someone gives you a ride home." "So do I." A television reporter walked toward me with a cameraman. "Mr. Bennett." "Yes. I'm Emily Harper with King 5 News. Would you mind answering a few questions?" "I really don't think so." "You've become the central witness." I'm not interested. What if people want to thank you? They don't need to. The cameraman lowered his equipment. Emily softened her voice. We've spoken to firefighters. So, they said several people would likely have died if you hadn't acted. I looked toward the flashing emergency lights. I'm glad they're alive. That's all you want to say? Yes. She nodded respectfully. Fair enough. She turned away without pressing further. I appreciated that. Linda always admired people who accepted no as a complete sentence. Because airport traffic had become impossible, the police drove me to a nearby hotel where stranded travelers were gathering. One of the officers insisted, "You shouldn't be wandering around tonight. It's only a few miles from my house, and the roads are closed." He wasn't wrong. I checked into a modest hotel less than 10 minutes from the airport. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet room with beige walls, a small television, and a window overlooking the parking lot. For the first time all day, there was silence. I set Linda's small travel bag on the dresser. Inside was the blue sweater she'd insisted on bringing, even though she never wore it. It still smelled faintly like her perfume. I sat on the edge of the bed holding it. That was when I finally cried. Not because of the accident, not because my hands hurt, but because there would never again be another text from Linda asking if I'd landed safely. Across town, my children knew nothing about where I was. Brian had just finished dinner with his wife Karen and their teenage son. Melissa was helping her youngest daughter finish a science project. Neither had watched the news yet. Brian glanced at the family group chat. Dad hadn't answered after writing, "No worries." Karen frowned. "Did your dad make it home?" "I'm sure he grabbed an Uber." "You could have picked him up." Brian sighed. "I had a client dinner." Karen didn't argue. She simply nodded, but her expression lingered longer than he liked. About an hour later, Brian's phone began vibrating. First his neighbor, then an old college friend, then a former coworker, finally his boss. "Brian." "Yeah, I just saw something on television." "What? Is your father Richard Bennett?" Brian frowned. "Yeah, why? You need to turn on Channel 5. "What happened?" "Just turn it on." The line went dead. Brian picked up the remote. The television was already covering the airport accident. Footage from a news helicopter filled the screen. Smoke, fire, ambulances. Then the camera zoomed in. A gray-haired man wearing a dark jacket was climbing through the shattered window of a burning sedan. Brian leaned closer. "No," Karen whispered. "Brian." The news anchor continued. Authorities say retired Seattle resident Richard Bennett repeatedly entered dangerous crash zones before first responders fully secured the scene. The screen changed. There I was, standing beside an ambulance with blood running down my sleeve. The reporter continued. Witnesses described Bennett as remarkably calm despite the danger. Karen slowly turned toward her husband. "Wasn't that—" Brian couldn't answer. His throat had closed. Across the city, Melissa received nearly the same phone call. Her friend Diane said only one sentence. "I think your dad's on every television station in Seattle." Melissa laughed nervously. "What?" "I'm serious." She turned on the television. Seconds later, she covered her mouth. The footage replayed again and again. Then the producers displayed a screenshot from the family group chat timeline investigators had reconstructed through airport security records. Mr. Bennett had reportedly arrived from Canada earlier this evening after attending his wife's funeral. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Her mother. She had been so consumed by deadlines, children's schedules, and everyday life. She hadn't stopped to imagine what that lonely flight home must have felt like. Then another image flashed across the screen. Me, walking alone through the airport terminal, carrying one suitcase. No family waiting. Melissa whispered, "Oh, Dad." My phone remained face down on the hotel nightstand. I hadn't looked at it once. I didn't hear the vibrations, didn't see the missed calls, didn't notice the flood of text messages arriving one after another. For the first time in years, everyone wanted to know where I was. I woke up just before 6 the next morning. For a few peaceful seconds, I forgot. I forgot I was in a hotel instead of my own bedroom. I forgot Linda was gone. I forgot about the airport. Then I reached toward the empty side of the bed. My hand touched nothing but cold sheets. Reality came back all at once. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window as the Seattle sky slowly turned from gray to pale blue. The television remained off. I had no interest in seeing myself on the news. I'd spent 40 years solving problems behind the scenes. Recognition had never been part of the job. Linda used to tease me about that. You'd rescue the whole neighborhood, she'd say, then sneak away before anyone could thank you. She wasn't wrong. My phone buzzed again, and again. I finally picked it up. 43 missed calls, dozens of text messages, Brian, Melissa, Karen, neighbors, former coworkers, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. The first message from Brian read, "Dad, where are you?" The second, "Please call me." Then, "I'm sorry." Melissa's messages weren't much different. "Dad, please answer. We're worried. Please don't be alone." I stared at the screen without replying, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted them to suffer. I simply wasn't ready to talk. There are moments when grief leaves no room for conversation. This was one of them. Around 8 o'clock, there was a knock on my hotel room door. When I opened it, I found the young reporter from the night before, Emily Harper. She looked almost embarrassed. "I'm sorry to bother you. How did you find me?" "The officer who drove you here didn't tell us. The hotel manager recognized you from television after the morning news." "I see. I promise I'm not here to shove a microphone in your face." I believed her. "What do you want?" She hesitated. "The hospital asked if I'd tell you something." "The hospital? The little girl you pulled from the sedan." I felt my stomach tighten. "Is she?" Emily smiled. "She's going to be okay." I closed my eyes. Thank God. Her parents wanted you to know she's asking about the man who broke the window. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. I imagine her parents have told her not to climb through broken windows. Emily smiled. "They also asked if you'd visit someday." "Maybe. I'll tell them." She started to leave, then turned back. "There are about 20 reporters outside." I sighed. "I figured. They don't know you're here. Let's keep it that way. You have my word." She walked away. For the first time since all this began, I felt there was still such a thing as decent journalism. Meanwhile, Brian hadn't slept. Neither had Melissa. At 7 that morning, they met outside my house. The house where they had both grown up. The house Linda had loved. Brian unlocked the front door using the emergency key I'd given him years earlier. Everything looked exactly the same. Linda's favorite rocking chair still faced the front window. My old work boots sat neatly beside the garage door. The smell of fresh coffee was gone. For over 40 years, Linda had started every morning before I woke. Now the kitchen felt strangely hollow. Melissa quietly walked to the dining room. There was still a small vase sitting in the center of the table. Inside were dried lavender flowers. "Our anniversary," she whispered. Brian looked over. "What?" "Mom always put fresh lavender here before their anniversary." Neither of them spoke for nearly a minute. The silence inside that house seemed louder than words. "We should straighten things up before Dad comes home," Melissa finally said. Brian nodded. It gave them something to do besides think. As Melissa dusted bookshelves in the living room, she noticed an old cedar chest tucked beneath the staircase. She frowned. "I've never seen this." Brian walked over. "It's Mom's." The lid wasn't locked. Inside were photo albums, letters, and 6 leather-bound journals. Each one had a year written neatly across the front in Linda's handwriting. Melissa carefully picked up the newest one. "I don't think we should." Brian looked away. "I think Mom would have wanted us to." He wasn't sure. Neither of them was. Still, Melissa slowly opened the journal. The first few pages contained ordinary memories, family dinners, vacation plans, birthdays. Then everything changed. One entry stopped both of them cold. "Richard sold his fishing boat today. Brian thinks we still have it." I begged Richard not to tell him why. He used every dollar to help with the down payment on Brian's first house. Brian would never accept it if he knew. Brian's face went pale. "No!" Melissa turned another page, another entry. Melissa's divorce attorney needed another payment today. Richard quietly withdrew money from the retirement account. He smiled afterward and told the children we'd been thinking about downsizing anyway. Sometimes love sounds like a joke told to hide a sacrifice. Melissa covered her mouth. "I thought, what?" I thought they really wanted a smaller house. Brian slowly sat down. So did I. They kept reading, page after page, year after year. Every journal revealed another quiet sacrifice. Richard accepted consulting projects after retirement, not because he was bored, but because Brian's business had nearly failed. Richard postponed replacing his aging truck because Melissa's oldest daughter needed braces. Richard skipped vacations because college tuition kept increasing. Never once had he complained. Never once had he asked to be repaid. Then Melissa found an entry written only 4 months earlier. She read it aloud through tears. The doctors in Vancouver believe there's one more treatment available. Richard insisted we try. He withdrew almost everything left in our retirement savings today. He smiled while signing the papers, but I know exactly what it cost him. If I don't survive, I pray the children never mistake his quietness for indifference. Beneath that silence is the biggest heart I've ever known. Brian leaned forward with both elbows on his knees. His shoulders began shaking. His voice cracked. I thought Dad was just careful with money. Melissa wiped tears from her cheeks. So did I. Neither of them had ever asked why I kept driving a 12-year-old pickup, or why I wore the same winter coat every season, or why I always said, I'm doing just fine. They had simply accepted it, because acceptance requires far less effort than curiosity. Around noon, Karen arrived carrying sandwiches. She immediately sensed something was wrong. What happened? Brian handed her one of Linda's journals. She read only 3 pages. Then she quietly sat beside her husband. I'm so sorry. Brian stared at the floor. I told him to take an Uber. Karen reached for his hand. I know. My mother had just been buried. I know. I didn't even ask if he was okay. Karen squeezed his fingers. What matters now is what you do next. Brian looked toward the front door.